Welcome to Jacob TV, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make ichigo's zanpakuto from bleach. So let's get right into it.
So first things first, I'm going to show you guys where I'm getting these files from. I'm getting my files from Wireframe. This is a place where a bunch of creators get together and make a bunch of 3D files and sell them at reasonable prices to everyone and anyone. So I highly recommend you check out what they got, but this is where we are getting the Ichigo's zanpakuto and swords from today. So we're going to scroll on down on their site here. It's probably one of the fewer things that come up, but they sell amazing things like Ben 10 watches, Daredevil, a bunch of other stuff, a Palosphere, but we're not here for that today, maybe in the future. But right now we're going to go down to the Ichigo's zanpakuto sword set files. So it's $30 for everything here, and if you want individual ones, they're just $10 a piece. Very reasonable price for how big, how massive these swords are. This price is very good and very reasonable. So I'm going to pay for all three because I plan on making all the swords, and that's just me personally. But if you just want to make one of them, go right ahead. No biggie. So let me purchase these, get the files, and then I'll show you how we are slicing them. So the slicer I'm using today is going to be Kira. The file for the Ichigo zanpakuto will come in 6 parts. If you want to print them all at once, my printer can print them all at once, but that would take 11 days, 34 minutes, and 1,755 grams. Personally, I do not recommend this method because let's say you're on day 5, something happens, and one of your parts fail, and it could affect all the other parts, which means all that time would be wasted, and that is just a huge risk. Unless you have 100% faith in your printer that can do this, then go right ahead. But for me, I'm going to be doing each one of these individually because it's just the safest method for me personally to be able to complete this project without really any setbacks, because 1,750 grams of filament is a lot. So let me print all these out and I'll show you what it's like to assemble it.
So after about 3 or 4 days, we have finally printed out all the parts. They're all looking great. The only one that came out iffy was this one. I think the reason just behind this, why it looked weird, what I'm talking about is, if you can see here, there's a bunch of little small gaps in between the layers. That's just because of the spool I was using. It just got tight at times for some reason, and which made this weird little gap. So the reason why this side here is sanded, because I wanted to see that if after sanding it, would the gaps still remain, and basically no. And it's, if anything, the primer that I'm going to be putting on this will just fill up the gaps. But other than that, we got everything printed out. What we're going to be using is the glue it all together. Is this 3D glue. It has worked great for me in the past, and hopefully it's going to work great for me now. But I'm not solely relying on the glue. I'm mainly just trying to keep it together. What I will be relying on, though, is, if you can see, is when printing out a sword this big, it can't just be solely printed by itself. Like, you can't just glue it all by itself. It comes with these little holes right here in which you can put rods through to make it support, just give it more support, so that if you're swinging it around, it doesn't just snap into a million pieces by sheer coincidence or something like that. So that's good. We got the rods, we got everything printed out, and the way we're gonna be gluing this is we're gonna glue it. We're gonna use this clamp right here to just make sure that it's flush and flat, and then we're gonna use, this is the only thing I can find that'd be long enough, is then we're gonna use this clamp right here to push it together so that the glue has the best chance of chemically binding the plastics together. So let's get into it, and let's start just assembling the sword. So the reason why I'm making this point in the video is because the clamp method from before, at least when I started it, it did not work with those pieces at all, just because there was no real stability. So what I've done is, I've been doing the sword, what I've been doing is I've been gluing, and really just using grunt work and just squeezing both ends together to make it flush so the glue can mix, and then to make sure that it was somewhat level, I would use this, and I just clamp the side right here just like that. And that's what I've been doing. It's been working pretty good so far. We just got those two left, and then we can get to sanding and priming. So we finally have the entire sword just completely made and finished. The reason why we have a new piece right here is because I finished it before and I did a test swing with it once I knew everything was just dried. And this part right here just snapped and just bent the whole thing. So I had to disassemble at least up to that part and replace it with this new one that's much more sturdy. So now that it's all glued together, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a nice little hand sander and just go through this entire thing. Alrighty, so we're finally on to the sanding portion of this sword. So what we're first going to do is we're going to take this 80 grit power sanding paper, and we're just going to power sand this entire sword, getting all the little bumps, nicks, crannies, just trying to smooth this down as much as possible. Then we're going to take this 150 grit, and I recommend having a block sander for this. I don't think you guys should do this with hand just because of how just flat this is and the flat surfaces. Doing this with a block will still really be keeping that edge and just consistency with this sword. With hands, you might create divots that you just didn't think you could do it by hand. But that's what I recommend to do, is just get a little block sander like this. They're cheap. Or if you have something just flat like a piece of wood, you can do that too, whatever you have available. Then once we have that done, I'm going to go through with the 220 grit with this whole thing right here and just get everything somewhat smooth. And then this is where I'm going to be a little bit more creative. If you don't want to do this, that's fine. But what I'm doing is I'm going to use this Bondo Silly Putty. That what I'm going to do is I'm going to try applying it to all these little places where I fused the plastic and plastic together with glue. And I'm just going to try to go through this entire thing and just put it all along the lines here, so that once I sand over that again, there is going to be no more lines showing here. And once I put the primer on, it's going to seem like a really nice fluent sword all the way through. So let's do that, and I'll come back once I put the Bondo on and show you what I'll be doing after that. We have finally finished sanding. It took about 15 minutes with the power sander here to make this look extremely good. Very few layer lines are visible. Everything else can probably just, any touch-ups could probably be done with the other sanding paper. But as of right now, this is looking fantastic right now. Even though with the power sander that is an 80 grit power sander, the results of just having none of that little layer lines that might have overlapped or something like that, that when you glide your hands across it, like for example, the difference between like smoothness level of this and just gliding your hands over it, and you can just feel the little layer lines, or you can feel the lip right here where we glued together, compared to this half of the sword which had the sander on it. There is no more lip. Those little lines that we're poking out are no longer there. It feels spectacular already with the 80 grit. And now we're going to take it with the hand sander with this little block here. We're going to take the 150 grit to this. We're just going to go over it. We don't need to really work on it as hard as before because the power sander did most of the work, but we're still just going to go over it, give it a good elbow grease across it, and then we're going to try taking it with the 220 grit, and then we're going to flip it over and then restart the process. So we have finally finished with the 150 and 220 grit. So right now, it feels super smooth right now. everything about this is just feeling fantastic. I'm loving it right now. And so now with the Bondo here, I was planning on going over really all the lines here, but right now they feel so smooth and flush that I don't think I'm gonna need it too much. Of course, I think I'm gonna be really focusing on these little gaps right here, like at the tip of the blade, because when printing this, they had the tendency, some of the edges here had a tendency to warp a little bit. So if anything, I'm gonna try to put Bondo there and anywhere I might see a bit of a gap. But that is what I'm planning on doing right now. At first, I'm not gonna show you guys how I'm doing the Bondo, at least with this first side, because it's my first time doing it, so let me try to figure it out. But when I flip it over to the other side, I'll try my best to show you how I do the Bondo, because hopefully I know what I'm doing by that point. So I'm gonna put the Bondo on, I'll show you what it looks like after it, and then I can show you just the future steps that I'm gonna need, that we're doing. So we finally have all the Bondo has been applied. We waited the proper amount of time that it says within the instructions for the Bondo to dry. And so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this 220 grit and focus on reducing a lot of the excess Bondo here. And then we're gonna move on to 600 and then 1000, just so we get that extremely smooth and extremely polished finish. So let's get straight into that and see how it turns out. We are finally done with the first half of the sword, people. We got the nice finish. We went over it with the 1000 grit. It feels so smooth, maybe absolutely no bumps on the sword at all. Maybe you feel maybe a slight divot like right here every now and then. But other than that, it's completely smooth, feels fantastic, looking fantastic after we put on the Bondo here. It's actually helping out a lot more than what I expected, so might actually be a requirement for future videos to get that extremely nice look. But now we are done with this half, this face of the sword. Now I'm gonna flip over and do the second half of the sword. Yippee! So I'm not going to show me really sanding this or a lot of steps unless I come to like a point where I found like a helpful detail. So if you're doing this as a tutorial video, then do the exact same thing that we did earlier onto this side, and I'll show you what to do after that. So when you begin priming something of either this scale or anything maybe even smaller than this scale, which you're going to be doing, the most important thing is to try to get your workspace as clean as possible. So whether that be just taking an air compressor, blowing off your workplace, or just taking just a towel and trying to go over this, just trying to making whatever you're priming as clean as possible so you don't get any potential just things that could go wrong, you're stopping it. But right now, what we're going to be using is a 2-in-1 Rust-Oleum primer here. I've had good results with it in the past, so that's what we're going to be using. If you have your own primer, feel free to use that, but that's just what I'm going to be using for this video. And while priming, always try to wear a just face mask, respirator, something like that, just so you're not inhaling a lot of the stuff from this. But if you don't have one of these or can't have one, try to make the place that you're working as well ventilated as possible, because it's just best for your health. So let's get into the priming. So what we're gonna do now that we have the primer has been on the sword, it's dried, all that, we're gonna start sanding it with the 220 grit all the way up to 1,000, and then we're gonna put one more layer of primer over the entire sword, and then we're gonna see how that looks after that. Hopefully we don't need to do any more sanding or priming. If it looks good after that, we're gonna go straight into spray painting this sword. So let's get right into the sanding process and let's see how it looks. So we got all the sanding done, both sides, the entire sword is done. As you can see, it's looking very reflective. That's kind of what you want with this. Like when sanding, like anything with really primer, it's okay for little spots like this, especially at places where like either bends or it's a bit of a sharp spot. That's fine, but you really want it to feel nice and smooth. That when you put that final layer on, especially if it's a primer that seals and fills stuff, just it's gonna take away all those little layers from before that you sanded off, and it's just gonna make the whole sword or anything that you do look really nice and really professional. So now we're gonna put that second layer of primer. Hopefully it's the final layer. So let's get right into it. We finally have the second layer of primer on the sword. I checked both sides, both look outstanding. This sword is coming out to be a really good. So now we're gonna get onto the painting part, the fun part of this whole thing. This is what's gonna give this sword its color, its pop, its everything. So with this sword, I know I'm gonna show you guys what I used for the sword with spray painting, but I first want to just spray paint the sword right away. At least one side with matte black, and the other side is gonna be matte gloss black, just because I want to see the difference between how the sword would look. And for this sword, I'm gonna be going with the matte black right here with this Krylon Fusion all-in-one painter, 5 times stronger adhesion or whatever. That is the spray can I've been going with. This side here is completely matte black, and this is exactly what I was kind of hoping for when making the sword, because I wanted to make it as realistic as possible to the show, and this looks by far the most like a realistic sword that I can get it to with using spray paint. As you guys can see with this glossy black, it's just it doesn't look real or professional. So as you guys can see, we got the whole sword freshly painted with that new spray paint, and now we're on the final touch-ups, and we can't just have a pure black sword. That's not what it's like in the show. So what we're going to do now is we are going to give it a distinguished blade look by painting a hammerhead silver. This is the paint I'll be using for the blade portion of it, the sharp portion of it. So what we're going to do is I got frog tape here, and I'm just going to do a line all the way down here separating it, and then I'm going to get some newspaper, some paper towels, whatever I can find, and I'm going to use it to guard the rest of the sword so that none of the gray here seeps over. So let's get right into that. I'll show you guys what I have once I get it all prepped and ready. So we got all the newspaper properly laid out. I have this green stuff, that's the Frogger, and this is just painter tape right here, the blue stuff. The green tape right here is meant for getting really crisp and clean lines, and this is just meant to really just keep newspaper down. It's just the most effective and least cost-effective tape for that option. So now we're gonna start spraying it. Once it's fully sprayed, we're gonna let it set, and then we're gonna peel it all off, and we're gonna see how it looks. So let's start spraying, and I'll show you what it's supposed to look like once you're done spraying. With the paint now fully dried, we are now able to peel it off and see how good of a job we actually did. So I got the green piece right here. Let's see just how well I can do this. there we go. And as you can see, that green tape did its job perfectly. Clean line all the way through and no residue. So the biggest thing I want to suggest with doing this type of tape or anything like that is to make sure that once you have that first line down, just go through it with a finger and just make sure you're pressing it down all the way so there's no air gaps in it, so that no paint accidentally gets out or anything like that. So as you can see, this turned out perfectly. Nice clean line and everything. And now before we are going to finish this lovely sword, the only thing we have to work on now is just for cosmetics to make it look a little nicer. It's this right here. And just to give the handled sword, we're going to put some of this medical tape around it, just give it a grip and make it look a little bit more professional. And when doing this, I recommend just keeping it out a little bit, just like this, just so that you can wrap around it real easily. So let me do that, and I'll show you what it's supposed to look like at the very end. And there we go. We got the tape on to give it that just nice little handle effect to it, kind of like in the show. But here it is. Here is the blade. Fully done. Ichigo zanpakuto, completely done from the show. Looks great. Let me show you what it looks like in person, swinging it around. Alrighty, so as you can see, the blade has been fully assembled and everything. It's got the nice little tang here, something to get a good grip with. And as you can see, this thing is massive, fully assembled. It is taller than me, and I'm like 6'3", so I'm guessing this blade is around 6'5", 6'6", something like that. But as you can see, this thing is just crazy. Like, look at it. It is just amazing. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. And if there's anything else from Bleach that you want me to attempt to make, or any sort of stuff from shows you want me to attempt to make, let me down in the comments. Always like to hear ideas. And I will see you next time on Jacob TV.